Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Dan Rivers found a $1,750 HOA bill in his mailbox for a neighborhood he didn't live in, he thought it was a mistake. It wasn't. It was the start of a wild battle involving forged maps, fake signatures, and a ruthless HOA president hell-bent on control. And Dan, he fought back. I've dealt with plenty of strange things in my line of work. Rotting floor joists, haunted basements, one time even a nest of raccoons behind an antique dumbwaiter. But nothing quite prepared me for the madness that arrived in my mailbox one soggy Tuesday afternoon. It was one of those overcast days when the Georgia humidity made everything feel like you were walking through warm soup. I had just gotten home from inspecting a century-old farmhouse slated for restoration when I pulled into my gravel drive and saw the envelope wedged in the mailbox like it had been stuffed in with righteous fury. The return address was stamped in gold script, Eagle Oak Preserve HOA, Office of the President. That was my first red flag. I didn't live in Eagle Oak Preserve, I lived next to it. My 5-acre property bordered their development, but was not part of their subdivision, a distinction I had verified not once, not twice, but 3 times before buying this land almost 9 years ago at a county auction. It had once been the site of a sawmill, half collapsed and overgrown, but the bones were good, and I spent years restoring it into a warm, livable home, independent, untouched, out of their reach, or so I thought. I opened the envelope and felt my eyebrows climbing by the second. Inside was a formal-looking invoice on faux parchment paper, quarterly dues statement, first quarter. Amount due, $1,750. Below that, a breakdown of services. Perimeter security patrol, private road resurfacing, landscape maintenance. What landscape? My driveway was gravel, and my idea of landscaping was not mowing for 2 weeks until the wildflowers got tall enough to attract bees. But the real kicker was the enclosed map. It looked like a satellite overlay with parcel boundaries marked in red. There it was, my land, outlined, shaded, and labeled Zone 5A, Extended Community Benefit Region. Not only that, but right next to it was a crescent-shaped stretch of land I didn't recognize. It was labeled Natural Drainage Easement and tied to a different name, parcel managed under Cooperative Funding Agreement. The invoice clearly stated I was jointly responsible for maintaining that zone. I read the fine print twice. They were billing me for land I didn't even own. At first I laughed. It was a short, incredulous snort, like when someone offers you expired milk. I figured it had to be a clerical error. Maybe some overeager intern at the HOA office decided to cast a wider net. So I did the reasonable thing. I called the number on the letter. A woman picked up, brisk and rehearsed. Eagle Oak Preserve HOA. This is Melanie. Hi, Melanie. My name's Dan Rivers. I just got a letter from you all, but I think it was sent in error. I don't live in your HOA. Never have. There was a pause. Keyboard clicks. Rivers. One moment. More typing. Ah, yes. Parcel ending in 3752, correct? You're in our new benefit overlay zone. I'm sorry, what? Our board voted last quarter to expand shared infrastructure responsibilities to include adjacent properties that directly benefit from Eagle Oak's security and maintenance standards. You're now in the extended community benefit region. I blinked. That's not a thing. That's not legally enforceable. You've received the first quarterly statement, correct? Oh, I've got it, I said, along with a map that has me paying for someone else's brush pile. If you'd like to appeal the assessment, she said crisply, you may attend our next board meeting. Or contact our president, Mrs. Karen Travis. She handles boundary inquiries. I wrote down the number and hung up, still half convinced this had to be some ridiculous mix-up. So I called Karen. She answered like she'd been waiting all day to argue with someone. Karen Travis. Mrs. Travis, this is Dan Rivers. I live on the north edge of the old mill property just outside Eagle Oak Preserve. I think you've mistakenly sent me an HOA bill. No mistake, mister. Rivers, she replied, with that kind of syrupy patience people use when talking to drunk relatives. You are adjacent to community infrastructure. Your property uses the same access roads and benefits from the same perimeter security. It's only fair you contribute respectfully. No. I don't use your roads. I don't have security gates. I maintain my own gravel access and mind my own land. Your driveway intersects County Route 31, which has shared maintenance with our private road under the Rural Overlay Compact. By being within half a mile of our jurisdictional boundary, you're eligible for proportional assessment. Eligible, I repeated. You're treating my land like a checking account. Don't be dramatic. Many surrounding owners have happily agreed to contribute. You're the only one making this difficult, and that strip of land I supposedly co-manage, I asked. Who owns that? It's currently unclaimed by active deed due to federal seizure, she said smoothly. That makes it eligible for cooperative regional funding, meaning you can't get the real owner, so you're shaking me down instead. Silence. Then, if you refuse to pay, we'll be forced to initiate formal collection actions. This is a community matter. It's about responsibility, Mr. Rivers. I hung up. Not rudely, but firmly. The kind of hang-up that said, "We're done here, Karen." I spent the next 2 hours in my office pulling every document I had: title deed, auction receipt, boundary survey, the original plat map, zoning statements, and the rejection letter I'd filed with the HOA back when the subdivision was first approved, specifically exempting my property from their jurisdiction. Everything was in order. My parcel had zero legal connection to Eagle Oak Preserve, but that invoice wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a threat, and I don't take kindly to threats. The next morning, I was at the county records office before they even flipped the open sign. I parked my truck, grabbed my coffee thermos, and walked in like a man on a mission, which technically I was. The clerk behind the counter, Marla, gave me a suspiciously cheerful smile, the kind you give someone right before telling them their dog's been impounded. Dan Rivers, I said, setting my folder down on the counter. I need to pull every document tied to parcel number 3752. Boundaries, plats, zoning overlays, especially anything filed in the last 18 months. She adjusted her glasses and clicked around on her keyboard. You having HOA problems? She asked without looking up. That obvious, Marla smirked. You wouldn't believe how many folks come in with the same story. HOA reaches out, tells them their property's magically part of some zone now. Suddenly, they owe $1,000 for shrubbery they didn't plant. She printed a stack of pages and handed them over. I thanked her and took a seat at one of the public tables. Everything looked like what I already had, until I found a filing timestamp 10 months ago, labeled Boundary Clarification and Cooperative Overlay, Eagle Oak Preserve. I leaned closer. It was a scanned PDF of a revised boundary map. My 5 acres were suddenly inside a shaded extension zone labeled Extended Benefit Region B. A note at the bottom said the changes were submitted with community approval and included a list of consenting owners, and right there, bold as daylight, was my name. Daniel Rivers supposedly having signed off on this nonsense in cursive script I hadn't used since junior high. I stared at it for a good minute, heart thudding. My signature had been forged. Next to mine were 4 others, names I didn't recognize, but under represented parcels, 2 matched property numbers I knew belonged to my neighbors. I sent texts to both, asking if they'd ever signed anything related to the HOA. They responded within minutes. Nope. WTF are you talking about? I took out my phone, snapped photos of the forged signature page and the revised map, and started building a digital folder. I needed to escalate this. At home, I printed copies of everything. I wrote a formal rebuttal letter addressed to Eagle Oak Preserve HOA, enclosing my original plat map, my deed and title, my signed HOA exemption from 9 years ago, and now the new forged map with their timestamp, in bold underlined font, added, I am not a member of Eagle Oak Preserve HOA. I have not signed or authorized any boundary expansion. The enclosed map contains a forged signature. Cease all contact and remove any references to my property from your assessments. I sent the package certified mail. Return receipt requested. I also sent copies to the county zoning board and the property assessor's office, just in case they'd been given similar updated maps. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up on speaker, half expecting another HOA minion. Mr. Rivers. The voice was male, formal. This is Brian Keller. I'm with Oak Ridge Geometrics. I believe you requested a boundary assessment? Ah, right. I'd called his office the same day I'd found the forged map, asking for an independent survey and review of HOA filings. His firm had done a lot of the original mapping for the county, so I trusted them. Yes, I did. Have you had a chance to look? More than that. Can we meet in person? We agreed on a diner near the edge of town. He showed up in a dusty SUV with faded company decals and a laptop bag that looked like it had survived multiple plane crashes. Over eggs and coffee, he opened his screen and rotated it toward me. "What you're looking at is the original recorded plat from 9 years ago," he said. "Your property was never part of Eagle Oak Preserve." In fact, their own internal survey, prior to this revised map, makes that very clear. He tapped a folder. "But this," he said, pulling up another document, "is the new submission. And it's a mess. They didn't just alter boundaries. They overwrote the GIS layer, submitted it as a technical correction, and logged it as a community agreement. That's not a correction. That's fraud." My stomach tightened. "Is that enough to get it reversed?" He nodded. "If it were just your case, maybe not. But I've looked at the other names. At least 2 of them are listed on properties that aren't even adjacent to the HOA zone, and the signature dates don't match the digital timestamps." He closed the laptop. "Someone's fabricating boundary data and submitting it as legal revision. That's not just unethical. That's criminal." I sat back, letting the weight of it settle. "This could blow up," I muttered. Keller smiled grimly. "It already has." By the time I drove home that afternoon, my brain was spinning. A forged map, a faked signature, and a man willing to testify to it. I knew exactly who was behind this. I could practically hear her voice in my head. "It's about responsibility, Mr. Rivers' number. It was about control, and I wasn't about to let her take mine." The next time I heard the name Joe Wensley, it was printed in block letters across the top of a federal seizure notice stapled to a wooden post near a dry creek bed, half a mile from my northern fence line. I found it by accident while hiking the property border with a friend of mine, Ben, who occasionally helped me with tree work. We were out looking at a leaning hickory near the edge when I spotted the sign, weather-warped and barely clinging to a crooked stake hammered into the ground. I crouched and read it twice. "Parcel seized, United States Internal Revenue Service, property of Wensley, Joe M." Below that, "Due to outstanding federal tax liabilities and financial crimes under investigation." I looked up at the surrounding land. Overgrown scrub, half-dead pines, a crumbling concrete slab, probably all that was left of a storage shed, and a rusted-out pickup, half swallowed by weeds. This was the shared natural drainage zone the HOA wanted me to pay for. A patch of swampy nothing that hadn't seen a lawnmower since Reagan was in office. I took a few photos on my phone, zooming in on the seizure date, April 14th, 2 years ago. That meant that land wasn't even actively owned anymore. It was under IRS control, completely off limits for any residential claim, let alone HOA landscaping charges. Later that day, I dug through the invoice the HOA had sent me again and reread the maintenance breakdown. They claimed the natural drainage easement was being cooperatively managed through regional contribution, citing shared ecological runoff and property value impact. Except it wasn't. The only runoff happening there was decades of rain washing away the memory of whoever Joe Wensley even was. I ran a property search through the county assessor's portal. The records confirmed what the IRS sign had said. The land was under federal holding, pending auction or environmental review. There was no legal basis, none, for a private HOA to include it in their fee structure. And yet, there it was on their map, right alongside my home, colored neatly into their fantasy world of extended benefit regions. My next call was to Brian Keller again, the geodetic engineer. I emailed him the parcel ID for the seized lot and asked if he could run a proximity analysis, basically to prove I wasn't functionally connected to it. He wrote back an hour later, "You're separated by forest, elevation drop, and drainage ridge. No ecological overlap, no legal connectivity. Anyone claiming joint use is lying." I stared at that last sentence. I wasn't just being charged by mistake. I was being charged on purpose for land I didn't own, couldn't access, didn't benefit from, and that belonged to a ghost under federal lock. That evening, as the sun was going down and the frogs started their usual racket in the trees, I decided I'd had enough polite paper pushing. I started drafting a new document, not a letter this time, but a formal refusal to recognize HOA jurisdiction and demand for immediate cease and desist. I used the most aggressive language my lawyer friend would approve of and cited both the fake boundary submission and the fraudulent inclusion of federally seized property. I sent it by certified mail, again with return receipt, and CC'd it to the HOA board, the county zoning authority, the local office of the IRS Property Division, and, for good measure, a regional news editor I knew at the Ledger just in case. 2 days later, a black SUV pulled into my driveway, slow and deliberate like it was trying to be dramatic. I was on the porch splitting cedar logs when a woman in a gray suit stepped out and made her way over, heels crunching the gravel. "Mr. Rivers?" she asked. "That's me." She handed me a manila envelope. Notice of intent to pursue collection under Community Infrastructure Agreement, as authorized by Eagle Oak Preserve HOA. I opened it right there. This one was slick. Thicker paper, legal style formatting, even a watermark on the letterhead. They were stepping up their game. The new charge was over $3,000, citing accumulated fees, non-compliance penalties, and community impact assessments. At the bottom was a signature, Karen Travis, HOA President. But the best part? It included a new clause. As a residential property within the declared proximity corridor, your participation is deemed binding through implied benefit doctrine. Implied benefit doctrine. I nearly laughed. They were inventing legal terminology now, like HOA Mad Libs. I turned to the woman. "You tell Karen if she wants a penny from me, she can come dig it out of my septic field." The woman gave a tight smile. "I'm just the courier." Then deliver that message with it. After she left, I scanned the entire document into my digital file system and added it to my growing case. I also called up a property lawyer I knew from a previous restoration dispute, Jillian Mendez, sharp as a tack and famously allergic to HOA nonsense. She picked up after 2 rings. "Jillian, it's Dan Rivers. I've got a situation. You like fraud cases?" There was a pause. Then, "Tell me everything. If there's one thing I've learned about HOA presidents like Karen Travis, it's that they thrive on silence, on the assumption that their victims will either give in or go away." I intended to do neither. After that courier handed me the latest extortion letter, I spent the next 48 hours coordinating with Jillian Mendez. She didn't waste time. By the end of the first call, she had already pulled up the HOA's corporate filings, tax documents, and their county zoning submissions. I emailed her everything I had: maps, forged signatures, fake parcel expansions, and the absurd implied benefit doctrine memo. By Monday, Jillian had drafted a formal notice of legal non-affiliation, laced with enough legal shrapnel to make any sane board member soil themselves. She also filed a preliminary complaint with the county's Land Use Oversight Committee and the Zoning Review Board. Her language was clear. Eagle Oak Preserve HOA has engaged in fraudulent boundary expansion, submission of falsified documents, and attempted financial coercion against a non-member landowner. She ended it with a beautiful threat. "We are exploring the pursuit of civil and criminal liability." The best part? She copied the county prosecutor. Meanwhile, I decided to follow a different lead, one from inside. I reached out to the geodetic engineer again, Brian Keller, and asked if he had any contact with other contractors who had worked with the HOA, especially anyone on the mapping or surveying side. After some digging, he connected me with a retired GIS technician who had done freelance mapping for several HOAs, including Eagle Oak, before quietly stepping away last year. We met at a diner just off Highway 84. The man's name was Eli Watts, late 50s. Nervous eyes smelled faintly of printer toner and bourbon. Over pancakes and bad coffee, he pulled out a beat-up flash drive and slid it across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Internal drafts," he said, voice low. "Last year, Karen asked me to smooth the border data on their development map. She claimed some parcels were incorrectly excluded from infrastructure benefits. I should have known better when she paid me in cash and asked for a second version without any metadata timestamps. Let me guess. You kept the originals." He nodded. "Wasn't about being noble. Just, I don't like being lied to." Back home, I opened the files. There it was, a clean, time-stamped version of Eagle Oak's original HOA boundaries. And next to it, a new one with my property, the seized Wensley parcel, and at least 4 other lots falsely shaded into the HOA's area. The overlay comparison made it painfully clear. This wasn't an error. This was a deliberate redrawing. Even worse, the submission form to the county had a signature page that, once again, listed me and the others as having approved the revision. Same fake handwriting, same illegal move, But now I had the before and after. I sent the files straight to Jillian. Her reply was almost giddy. "They're cooked. We're submitting this to the Land Commission first thing in the morning, also preparing a fraud complaint." This is textbook boundary laundering. While she worked on the legal side, I decided to go public. I'd had enough of Karen hiding behind rules no one voted on and community principles she made up on the fly. I wrote a detailed account of everything that had happened so far, complete with map comparisons, financial breakdowns, and HOA correspondence, and submitted it to the Ledger, the largest local paper. I didn't expect them to bite so quickly, but within 24 hours, a reporter called me. Her name was Devin Hale. Young, sharp, didn't waste time. She showed up the next day with a notepad and a field recorder, asked smart questions, and photographed everything. My maps, the seizure sign, even the courier's letter. By the end of the interview, her eyes were blazing. "This is systemic," she said. "They're not just targeting you. They're trying to grow revenue by forcibly expanding jurisdiction. And lying to do it," I added. The story ran 2 days later on the front page. Private land, public lies, local HOA accused of boundary fraud. It featured my case, an interview with Keller, and statements from 2 other neighbors who realized they'd also been falsely added to the HOA map. The fallout was immediate. First, my inbox flooded. People I'd never met sent messages, photos, even scanned invoices. At least 7 landowners around Eagle Oak had received similar new member bills in the past year. Some had paid. Some had ignored it, but no one had fought back. Until now. Second, Karen's PR machine kicked into high gear. The HOA posted a community-wide letter calling the article inflammatory and misleading, claiming they had operated under good faith assumptions of geographic inclusion. It read like a nervous insurance company trying to rebrand a 4-alarm fire. Fire as unexpected warmth. And third, best of all, the County Land Commission sent out a formal notice of investigation naming Eagle Oak Preserve HOA and listing 10 parcels under review for illegal annexation via cartographic misrepresentation. Jillian called me that night, practically gleeful. "They're bleeding, Dan." And we're just getting started. I stepped out onto my porch, lit a cigar I'd been saving since last 4th of July, and watched the quiet tree line beyond my fence. For once, it wasn't the woods I was worried about. It was the war in the spreadsheets. You'd think that once the Land Commission opens an investigation and a local paper drops a front-page expose, the people responsible might take a step back. Maybe lie low. Maybe lawyer up. But not Karen. No, Karen doubled down. 3 days after the Ledger story ran, I woke up to the sound of metal clanking on my front gate. It was just after sunrise, and the woods were still wrapped in that pale blue morning fog. I slipped on boots, grabbed a jacket, and headed out. There, bolted to my wooden entrance post, was a fresh metal sign. HOA issued, powder-coated, professionally printed. Notice of non-compliant property, subject to assessment fines. Contact Eagle Oak, Preserve HOA for resolution. I stood there, blinking. It was surreal. Like waking up in a Kafka novel. My property, private, documented, completely outside their jurisdiction, was now marked as non-compliant by a board of self-righteous suburban bureaucrats with delusions of empire. I called Jillian immediately. She didn't even let me finish the story before cutting in. Send me photos. Take a time-stamped video. And don't remove it yet. Why? Because it's trespassing and attempted intimidation. We're about to file our first injunction. While Jillian got to work on the legal front, I made calls to the 7 other landowners who had reached out after the article. One of them, Bethany Dorsey, a widow in her 60s, told me she'd found a similar notice zip-tied to her mailbox post. Another guy, Martin Devlin, had HOA flyers shoved under his truck windshield wipers with phrases like delinquent membership and failure to contribute harms the whole. This wasn't just mismanagement anymore. It was coordinated harassment. The next day, Jillian filed for an emergency cease and desist order in county court against Eagle Oak Preserve HOA on behalf of me, Bethany, and Martin. In the filing, she included photos of the signage, the bogus maps, and screenshots of HOA emails using phrases like strategic expansion and boundary encouragement zones. The hearing was set for the following Monday. That weekend, I installed 2 more cameras, one pointed at the gate, another facing the dirt access trail that ran behind my property line. If they were going to pull more stunts, I wanted it on tape. And sure enough, late Sunday night, a motion sensor pinged me. I checked the live feed on my phone. There, in grainy black and white, were two men in reflective vests. One held a clipboard, the other carried a plastic stake and a mallet. They approached the same stretch of fence and began hammering a second sign into the ground. I turned on the spotlight and blasted a pre-recorded message through my intercom. This property is private. You are being recorded. Leave now or law enforcement will be contacted. They bolted. The next morning, I handed the footage to Jillian. She didn't say a word, just smiled like a lioness spotting a wounded deer. Monday came fast. The courthouse was packed tighter than usual, thanks no doubt to the newspaper article and growing neighborhood drama. Karen arrived in a beige pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, flanked by two board members and an overpaid attorney who looked like he charged by the syllable. The judge was a serious, no-nonsense man with silver hair and a voice like gravel in a coffee grinder. Jillian laid out the case first, clear, calm, devastating. She showed the timeline of the map alterations, the forged documents, the sign postings, and the trespassing footage. Karen's lawyer fumbled through a defense that boiled down to, "Our intentions were noble, and community benefit overrides procedural flaws." The judge's expression didn't change once, but his eyebrow arched so hard I thought it might break orbit. Then came the ruling. Temporary injunction granted. HOA is hereby barred from initiating contact with the plaintiffs, levying fees, posting signage, or altering property boundaries until further review. Any continued attempts will result in civil contempt proceedings. Karen didn't look at me on the way out. She just kept walking, lips tight, fists tighter. Outside the courthouse, Devin Hale from the Ledger caught up with me. "Big win today." I nodded. "First round." "You think she'll stop?" I glanced toward Karen's disappearing SUV. "No." But she just ran out of invisible ink. That night, I went home, took down the trespass sign, and burned it in the fire pit. But I kept the bolt. It would make a good exhibit piece. Evidence that HOA delusion wasn't just annoying, it was criminal. The silence after the injunction was almost suspicious. No more letters, no more metal signs. No HOA flyers tucked under windshield wipers like mafia warnings. For 2 whole weeks, it felt like the neighborhood had been tranquilized. No peeping board members, no veiled threats, no midnight survey crews with clipboards and mallets. But I've lived through too many restorations to trust peace that comes too easy. Rotten wood doesn't creak when it's soaked. It snaps when you step on it. And the snap came soon enough. It started when Jillian forwarded me a notice she received from the County Land Commission, not from the Fraud Division, from the Land Use Policy and Planning Board. Apparently, Eagle Oak Preserve HOA had submitted a petition to retroactively annex all adjacent parcels they had erroneously omitted in their original formation charter, including mine, Bethany's, Martin's, and 4 other properties. The trick? The petition was worded to sound like we had agreed. They claimed the omission was corrected via administrative consensus from affected landowners. No signatures, no proof. Just another batch of lies wrapped in legal doublespeak and filed before anyone could stop them. Jillian was livid. "They're trying to launder the fraud through policy," she said, pacing across my living room like a field commander. "If the Land Use Board signs off on this, even temporarily, it muddies our whole case. They're playing the long game now. This isn't about fines anymore. It's about rewriting the jurisdiction entirely. We needed leverage, real leverage, something that couldn't be explained away as a clerical error or vague community benefit. That meant following the money. That night, I went through every document Karen's HOA had ever sent. Past newsletters, budgets, meeting minutes, everything I could get my hands on. That's when something clicked. In a financial report from 2 years prior, there was a line item labeled Special Reserve Fund, Community Outreach and Expansion, totaling over $42,000. That same year, HOA dues across Eagle Oak Preserve had jumped by 15%. The explanation given was infrastructure upgrades. But the only upgrades I'd ever seen were a new mailbox kiosk and a half-finished stone archway by the neighborhood sign. Jillian filed a Freedom of Information request with the county treasurer's office. What came back was even uglier than we expected. Turns out, the special fund had been siphoning money into a separate LLC, Oak Reach Services, a supposedly independent vendor hired by the HOA for consultation and land negotiation services. But Oak Reach had only 1 registered employee, 1 account, and 1 listed mailing address, a P.O. box in the next town over, belonging to Karen Travis. We had them. The embezzlement angle changed everything. Fraud over land was one thing. Misusing HOA funds for personal gain? That brought in a whole new level of interest. Jillian wasted no time filing a second complaint, this time with the district attorney's white-collar crimes division. She also contacted a local watchdog group that had been tracking HOA corruption statewide. And then came the surprise. One of the board members who'd been standing silently behind Karen in court, Trent Barlow, a meek-looking man with thinning hair and a permanent wince, reached out to Jillian. He asked for a private meeting, said he was done being part of this circus. We met him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Trent looked like he hadn't slept in days. He brought a battered laptop, 2 manila folders, and a whole lot of regret. "I didn't know the extent of it," he said. "I thought we were just cleaning up the map boundaries. But she's been running her own little empire. The LLC, the fake invoices, even backdating minutes." He handed Jillian a flash drive. Meeting recordings, internal emails, copies of the original vote logs. Most of the board didn't even know we were filing that annexation request. She did it with 2 fake votes. "What do you want?" Jillian asked. "Immunity, or whatever version of that you can get me." "I just want out," Jillian nodded. "If what's on here is real, you're not our enemy. You're a witness." That evening, she began sorting through the files. The recordings were gold. In one, Karen could be clearly heard saying, "These fence sitters don't pay now, they'll pay later. You just wait. We redraw the map, claim it was always meant to be that way. Nobody checks these things." I sat in silence, hands clasped. We had motive, we had method, we had money trails, and now we had Karen on tape admitting to premeditated boundary fraud. Jillian looked up, eyes bright with quiet fury. "This isn't just about your land anymore, Dan. This is a goddamn RICO case waiting to happen." By the time the district attorney's office officially opened an investigation, the air in Eagle Oak Preserve was thick with panic and passive aggression. Karen had gone underground, figuratively speaking. Her emails stopped. No new HOA meetings were scheduled. The HOA bulletin board by the clubhouse, once plastered with smug updates and flowery slogans about neighborhood unity, had been stripped bare. Just thumbtacks and the faint ghost of paper torn too fast. But silence isn't the same as surrender. One rainy Thursday afternoon, while I was organizing tools in the barn, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The back trail camera had picked up activity. I opened the feed and froze. A man in a county inspection vest was walking the edge of my eastern boundary, clipboard in hand. But he wasn't from the county. His badge, when I zoomed in, was laminated paper in a cheap plastic sleeve, and the patch on his shoulder, crookedly sewn. Sloppy. I stepped into the rain, crossed the field fast, and called out before he reached the cedar tree line. "You lost?" He turned, startled, maybe 30, wiry, with the nervous energy of someone paid under the table. "Just here to conduct a perimeter survey, sir. County audit of parcel boundary lines. Which county?" He blinked. Fulton." "We're in Dawson." He ran. I didn't bother chasing him. Just recorded the whole interaction, then yanked the camera footage. Later, Jillian traced the truck plates. Rental vehicle. Paid for by, surprise, Oak Reach Services, LLC. Karen was trying to fabricate a last-minute justification to make it look like the HOA had reasonable cause to believe my land was in dispute. If they could paint the boundaries as ambiguous, then maybe, just maybe, the Land Commission might hesitate, might stall the fraud investigation. It was desperate and stupid, but it meant one thing. She wasn't finished yet. That weekend, the whistleblower board member, Trent, emailed us again. He'd intercepted a message between Karen and her 2 closest allies on the board. In it, she proposed creating a retroactive easement agreement for access to the HOA Greenbelt, claiming it required transit rights through my parcel. "She's trying to imply that your land has always been a service corridor," Trent wrote. "She's going to file it with the county next week. Claims it was a forgotten agreement from 2 decades ago. Another forgery in the works." Jillian went full steam. She compiled a detailed timeline report outlining every incident, the fraudulent map, the fake notices, the fabricated company, the attempted surveillance, the forged easement, and the financial misappropriation. Then she looped in the state attorney general's office, leveraging the RICO angle now that we had evidence of a conspiracy for financial gain under the guise of a legal entity. Then something unexpected happened. I got a call from Joe Wensley. The name stopped me cold. He was the man who supposedly owned the adjacent ravine, the property the HOA originally tacked onto my fake dues notice, the same land they tried to say I was responsible for maintaining. Joe spoke slow, like a man recovering from something. They tried to buy me off, he said. Karen offered me 10 grand in cash if I signed a statement that said you and I had a shared boundary agreement. Told me it was just to smooth over some records. Did you sign? Hell no. I've been hiding from creditors, not the law. I don't want to get mixed up in some HOA con job. Jillian got a statement from him, signed, notarized, and time-stamped. With that, we not only proved the boundary claim was bogus, we proved intent. Karen was actively trying to manipulate testimony and manufacture legal history. 2 days later, the grand jury subpoena landed. Karen, 2 board members, and a bookkeeper from the HOA office were all named. Charges included conspiracy to commit land fraud, falsification of legal documents, financial misappropriation of HOA funds, witness tampering, attempted unlawful annexation, wire fraud. They didn't even bother denying it anymore. The moment that subpoena hit the news, Karen's lawyer dropped her as a client. By that Friday, county investigators raided the HOA office. They boxed up computers, took physical files, and sealed off the records room. The same place that used to print smug newsletters now looked like a crime scene. Bethany called me that night, voice shaking. We really did it, didn't we? Not yet, I said, watching the blinking light of my gate camera reflect off the wet driveway. But the house of cards is tipping. The trial didn't take long to gather steam. With the grand jury indictment public and media interest swirling like a hornet's nest, Karen's fall from grace became the main event of the season. Every local paper ran headlines. HOA president faces fraud, embezzlement charges. Eagle Oak scheme shakes community trust. Even a national HOA reform blog picked it up, calling it one of the boldest land grab attempts in recent memory. Karen was booked in county jail, wearing sunglasses and a scarf like a failed soap opera villain. Her mugshot went viral, her lips curled in a snarl mid-word, as if she'd been interrupting the photographer to declare something irrelevant and condescending. The formal charges stacked like bricks. Prosecutors had receipts, emails, recordings, forged maps, financial records from Oak Reach, LLC showing direct transfers to Karen's personal checking account. She used HOA funds for spa weekends, hotel suites, flights to leadership summits in Florida. She had a tanning salon membership billed to community beautification. She even paid for a private security guard to monitor her property with HOA money. But it was the audio clip Jillian had uncovered, Karen admitting to redrawing the map to make homeowners pay later, that sealed the coffin. The jury only needed to hear it once. Her smirk during playback didn't help. Karen was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole only after 8. The judge called her actions a calculated predatory abuse of legal structures intended to serve the public. 2 board members were given suspended sentences and community service in exchange for their cooperation. The bookkeeper pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Karen in exchange for reduced charges, and the HOA officially dissolved. By court order, Eagle Oak Preserve HOA was disbanded, all assets frozen pending civil claims, and its charter invalidated. An independent forensic accountant appointed by the court found over $187,000 in questionable expenditures over the last 4 years. Residents were stunned, some grateful, others humiliated they'd been part of it. I wasn't done yet. Jillian filed my civil lawsuit against what remained of the HOA entity and Karen personally. Between emotional distress, defamation, attempted extortion, and legal expenses, the court awarded me $245,000 in damages, paid from the HOA's remaining escrow funds and Karen's frozen accounts. Bethany, Martin, and 2 others filed their own suits, and won. The Land Commission added new oversight requirements for all HOAs operating in the county. But honestly, the money was the least satisfying part. What mattered more was the day I rebuilt the old wood sign at the end of my driveway. Simple, carved by hand, painted in deep earth tones. This land is not included just because you say it is. I left it there, rain or shine. Sometimes folks passing by stopped to take photos. A few old-timers knocked on my door just to say thanks. A month later, I got an invite to speak at a community rights summit in Asheville. Jillian came too. She introduced me as the man who outplayed an entire HOA with a hammer, a barn cam, and a bullheaded sense of property law. I gave a 10-minute talk called Check the Map Twice. It got a standing ovation, and you know what? I didn't mind the attention, But I was happier back home, on my 5 acres of stubborn independence, restoring century-old woodwork, watching storm clouds roll in over unclaimed sky, and knowing the only dues I owed were to the land beneath my feet.